Mundo Ejecutivo presenta.
Hola amigos, bienvenidos una vez más a un programa más de 18 minutos de innovación, liderazgo, transformación digital, economía, en fin, los temas más necesarios en estas épocas. Y les doy la bienvenida una vez más a nombre de Mundo Ejecutivo, La Medir y Smart Speakers. Yo soy Francisco Rodríguez Aguirre, presidente de Smart Speakers, el buró de conferencistas más importante de Latinoamérica. Y me acompaña mi amigo Mauricio Reynoso.
Como siempre, un gusto estar aquí contigo, Paco. Un gran espacio, 18 minutos, y muy entusiasmado que hoy tenemos un gran invitado, ¿no?
Sí, nuestro gran invitado es nada más y nada menos que Doug Lipp, que él fue el director de formación de la Universidad de Disney y es autor del libro Disney U. Doug, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Francisco, Mauricio, it's my honor. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
It's our pleasure, Doug. Welcome.
Thank you.
Doug, what does Disney do to have employees with such a good attitude and such a good customer service?
How much time do we have for the answer?
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Well, I know we're going to discuss a lot of reasons for this during our discussion today, but Disney does 3 things really well. And I work with clients around the world in a variety of industries. Some do a really good job of this, and many companies struggle. But the 3-pronged strategy that Disney uses so effectively is, first of all, you got to hire right. Get the right people on board. Make sure they have the right attitude and they have a desire and a passion. So hire the right people. So hire right. Then train right or develop right. How do you onboard the new hire? How do you train the supervisor? How do you continually educate and develop your human capital? So education has to be a huge component. So hire right, train right, and the third component is treat right. Have a culture of respect, have a culture that people trust so that when they get hired and they get trained and they go to work, they are as passionate as ever before. But sometimes organizations fail in these areas. They hire the wrong people, or they say there's no budget for training and their culture is toxic. So even the best, most positive employee who is sent into a toxic work culture will soon degrade. So that's the simple: hire right, train right, treat right.
Thank you.
You have already mentioned something that I consider has been touched in a significant way given the pandemic, Doug, which is the organizational culture. In these times, how do you see that the organizational culture has changed and how we can build up what is needed to face the current challenges around the world?
Well, Mauricio, that's a challenge that, yes, all of us are facing. And recently I was talking with some other executives and we all agreed that worldwide, regardless of your age, regardless of your company size, everyone is suffering from midlife crisis. Midlife crisis meaning I'm going to change my life, I'm going to live my values, I'm going to do things that matter to me. So to answer your question, Mauricio, organizations have to make sure that their cultural values express empathy toward their employees, express empathy toward their clients, their customers, their patients, because everyone is so tired. They really gravitate towards an organization, a store, a business that is technically proficient, yes, and they add that empathetic component of really caring about their employees and their customers. And I would think that post-COVID, that empathetic, caring, trusting environment is going to help organizations differentiate from their competition.
Great. What is the best way to choose the values of an organization, Doc?
Well, Francisco, that's an interesting question, and let me answer a little bit differently. I see a lot of organizations that spend a lot of time and energy and money creating values, and they might be really good values, but where there are so many problems is leadership, ownership, executives, managers are not living and breathing those values every single day. So I would rephrase that by saying, choose the values that reflect your company, choose the values that your employees embrace, choose the values that your clients and your customers embrace. But most importantly is once you have chosen the values and you've written your mission statements and your vision statements, make sure that your leaders and owners and supervisors are a living example of those values. I'll give you an example. Walt Disney said before Disneyland ever opened, I want our parks to be so clean that people feel comfortable eating food from the street. Well, of course, he wasn't expecting people to eat from the street, but when Walt Disney walked through Disneyland, going to or from meetings or simply enjoying the park, he would always pick up trash that he found on the ground. So he was a living example of that value of cleanliness. So again, your values are your choice, but make sure you live them and breathe them and you're consistent and sincere with those values.
And I think that's a critical point, Doc. If we talk about how the people live the values of the company, could you tell us more about the role of the leader? Because I am convinced that the leader is to model the forms, to really be the role model for the collaborators to follow what is characteristic in their organizations. What do you think about this, the leadership responsibility on this?
Yes, I agree completely. And leaders are always being watched, and employees and vendors and customers will believe a leader's actions more than his or her words. So I'll give you a specific example of leadership living the value. I was doing a job for a huge store that sells all kinds of products. And I was walking through the store with one of their executives and I asked him a question about a product. He didn't have the answer. And I said, well, why don't you take out your phone and Google it and let me know? And he said, no phones are allowed in the store for employees. All employees have to put their phones in a special locker in the break room. And he said, think about it, Doug, if I took out my phone right now as the leader of this company, that would completely undermine our value of no phones on the floor, no phones in the store, because that would take away from connectivity with our customers. So he said to me, Doug, you're not an employee, so why don't you take out your phone and you Google it? And interestingly, Mauricio, this store that I worked for is nationwide in the United States, and that value is so strong about no phones in the store that they are tremendously successful having great conversations with customers, and they don't have the problem of their employees' faces buried in their phones all the time because their phones are in the break room.
Mm-hmm. Very valuable concept.
Doc, what was the moment more difficult in your career? How did you feel, and how do you deal with it?
Well, Francisco, I would say it's when I decided to leave Disney. My value, we've been talking about values, and my value primary is creative freedom. And so there was nothing wrong with Disney. I just needed to spread my creative wings a little bit. So I was sitting in a Disney sound stage at Disney headquarters, the Disney studios. And I was leading with another man a creativity workshop for the artists, for the animators. And he and I had been working together for several days, and he was giving a presentation. So I was kind of thinking. And so I created a force field analysis, basically a piece of paper with a line down the middle. And on one side, you put forces for staying. And on the other side, you put forces against staying. And I had all of these forces for leaving the company, creative freedom, all the things that I loved. And the only real compelling reason to stay at Disney was my ego, to have Mickey Mouse on my business card and to have the name recognition and the relative comfort of an executive job. But I felt constrained. I felt like I had handcuffs on. So I had to be true to my values of creative freedom. It wasn't about making more money. It was just being able to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And it was scary as can be, but it was the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I can imagine tough moments, and thanks for sharing, though. In terms of the organization as per se as Disney, I can guess that some difficult situations were when you had to enter into Japan or Paris with new parks there in terms of culture. What the main learnings are from those experiences for you, for Disney as an organization, once you decided to go into Japan or Paris new parks?
Sure. Well, Mauricio, this is a challenge that is getting more and more prevalent worldwide as the global economy is more now than ever before so important. And the challenges that I still see with many clients around the world. In fact, when I left Disney, I helped start a consulting firm in Palo Alto near Stanford University with a Stanford University professor. And we called our new consulting company the Intercultural Relations Institute. So our whole business model was to help international companies avoid the problems that we all see with global mergers and multinational companies. So to answer your question, there are so many different ways to do this, but you must trust your local employees. So if you are, even in your own country, there are cultural differences from the north of the country to the south, from the east to the west, and you must trust your local employees, your local leaders. If you're a franchise operation, trust your local franchisees to give you feedback about the cultural differences. I'll give you one very simple, almost funny example, but I was doing some work for many years with the McDonald's Corporation, which, by the way, as we all know, recently decided to leave all of their business in Russia. They're selling their business in Russia. So that's a huge decision. But one of the things within the United States is different franchisees, meaning owners of McDonald's from different parts of the company, were asking the corporate headquarters for permission to have different flavor French fries, fried potatoes. And people on the East Coast were saying, we have a very old style seasoning that's called Old Bay. And it's just a sprinkling kind of seasoning. But our customers all through the East Coast love Old Bay seasoning. Can we use that on our French fries? And finally, McDonald's agreed, and the sale numbers for French fries skyrocketed on the East Coast. So there's a combination of, you've got to have global control at a macro level, but you also have to have local influence. So global control at a macro level, but allow local influence and local trust to help drive those business decisions.
Doc, you are a speaker. What's the most interesting question that they have, any person has ever asked you at a conference?
Well, Francisco, that's there are so many questions, but I've been blessed over the years to have worked with many Disney executives and men and women who worked directly for Walt Disney. I never worked directly for Walt, but one man, his name is Marty Sklar. He was the chairman of Disney Imagineering. So Disney Imagineering is where the engineers and the artists and the creative men and women design the Disney attractions, the rides, all kinds of amazing products. And going to presentations with Marty Sklar, he and I would share the stage, we would give presentations. After those presentations, we would always do book signings. He would sign his books and I would sign my Disney U book. And parents, grandparents would always ask Marty this. So Marty, I love the Imagineering culture, and so does my daughter, so does my son, so does my granddaughter. How does my child become an Imagineer? And Marty would say, well, there are lots of ways to do that. What is your concern? And sometimes the parents would say, well, my daughter or my son is not an engineer. They don't know how to do math. They're not a scientist. And Marty would say, that's okay. Do they like to tell stories? Oh, well, yes, they do. Well, how would your son or daughter tell a story? And then Marty started saying, would they tell a story through dance? Would they tell a story via a musical instrument, via singing? So how many ways can you tell a story? And that's what we do in Imagineering, is we have thousands of people who are great storytellers, but they tell stories sometimes in dramatically different ways. So as long as you have passion and you like to tell stories, you could be an Imagineer, and so could your grandson or your child. And you could see the facial expression would go, because now they saw there was potential for their child or their grandchild to become an Imagineer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Doc, the time has ended. Thank you very much for being with us, with all your knowledge. Y muchas gracias, amigos, por acompañarnos en una edición más de 18 minutos con el gran invitado que tuvimos el día de hoy, Doc Lipp, exdirector de formación de la Universidad de Disney. A nombre de la Medir, a nombre de Mundo Ejecutivo y a nombre de Smart Speakers, el Buró de Conferencistas, les damos las gracias por acompañarnos una vez más. Hasta luego.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Doc.
Thank
Mundo Ejecutivo presentó